What's interesting to me is when you talk about audience, it seems like you spontaneously or instinctively are describing a concert audience. Wouldn't you say, I would bet you a fancy lunch that the majority of your listeners are going to hear your music electronically rather than in the concert hall? You've got this beautiful new CD that's come out recently that I've been enjoying very much called The Tuning. And I would be willing to bet that that the audience for that CD, for those recordings, will vastly outnumber the number of people that are able to hear that piece in a concert hall. And I think that's a reality for a lot of composers. So that being said, if one accepts my proposition, if you're writing, do you imagine a concert situation primarily still, or are you also thinking about, what's this going to sound like when it's recorded?
That's a very interesting question. So I absolutely agree with your premise there. And I would say certainly for all of the pieces on that CD, I was imagining a concert situation because, of course, they were written for concerts. And I've been fortunate enough that everything that I've been written has been done with a known performance in mind. And when it's not, it's sort of been for me to play or me to play with my daughter or whatever. So the liveness of the situation in which it's originally going to be performed is what I'm thinking of when I write it. But you're absolutely right to say that the vast majority of encounters with this music is going to be likely in a situation like we are now with headphones on, perhaps perhaps on your own. And in fact, that's how I, as it were, consume most of my music these days. Is with headphones on my own, and it's not that part of the social experience. And I have to say that I didn't write any of that stuff with that in mind, and I think that, well, I think venue is incredibly important, and context, as we've been talking, has a big impact on how you listen. And actually, why not write music that is specifically for recording and for listening in that sort of way? And I guess then we get to the sort of album concept, which popular music is way ahead of us in that kind of regard. And I think we're always sort of chasing after this sort of elusive live experience when and it's kind of a ghost hiding behind all these recordings that we have. But I like the ghost, and I do like to be in a room with people and to play to people. And I think maybe in a way that recording is this it's kind of like, it's also a message of hope, is to say, you can play this, again. And particularly with chamber music, then things do get played more than once. And so the world is big enough for all sorts of approaches, I think. And as it happens in these CDs of mine that have been recorded, they were all intended for live performance. Though, actually one of the pieces in the orchestral pieces is yet to have its premiere. So there's a real tangible, for me anyway, example of what you've just said. But I think they are different experiences, and there is something very special about being in a room with other people and performers and experiencing music as a communal event. And there is a different and equally special experience of being on your own and listening. And again, if the music is rich enough, then it can sustain these various different contexts.
A few different figures come to mind, actually, in this recording versus concerts idea. There are clearly composers who thought of their music primarily in terms of the concert hall. And I think there are those who primarily imagine it in terms of recordings. So, for example, John Cage is known to have disliked recordings. He didn't exactly discourage them, but because he also had a hand in producing some of them. But for the most part, he felt that the music had to be experienced live in a room with other people. And I think the content of the music, its nature, also really encourages that. I have to admit that I've often enjoyed Cage's music in concert situations, but I often find myself getting terribly bored if I have to listen to it on a CD. Conversely, Stravinsky, the late works of Stravinsky, I think, if they're not written for the microphone, they sure sound like it. They sound marvelous on recordings. And I have to imagine that his experience making recordings of all of his works with Robert Kraft at Columbia Studios had to have had an influence in that sense. There's an immediacy to the sound. It has an almost pop music or a jazz-like quality where it really benefits from being close-mic'd. It's very articulate, it's very crisp, it's very clear and transparent and punchy, and it sounds amazing on recordings. So I think that a composer's relationship to recording actually can play a significant role in the sort of music they end up writing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that brings up timbre again, because recording offers particular, as you said, it sounds like it wants to be close mic'd and is punchy, and of course then we can do that sort of thing with a live experience as well. And if you're working with amplified sound, for example, but in a live experience, then you potentially have somewhere in between the two, and you can be inspired by and want to use those kinds of timbres and that kind of perhaps cleanness that you might associate with recordings, but within a live context as well.